Book 7, The Soldier in the Middle of the World, Chapter 12, The Kayas Again. 3 weeks later, on the 31st day of harvest, Anoki Kaya peered out the back door of the second resting station. It was still dark, but the sun would be rising in less than an hour. It'd be more appropriate for him to go out the front door, as if he was off to milk the cow. He crept across the second resting station to the front door, opened it, stole down the stairs, and over to the large barn. The 2 horses were ready, just as he'd left them a few hours before. He'd led them out of the barn, hoping no one would hear the bridles jingling. The front door opened again, and Anoki watched the figure hurry to join him. "You sure you still want to do this?" he asked. "I just want to be with you," she answered, "and not be here anymore. It's so boring." Anoki grabbed her roughly and gave her a quick kiss. "This won't be, so mount up. We don't have much time." Priscilla mounted as Anoki got on his horse. Without a word, they kicked their animals into a quiet walk to the canyon entrance. Peyto was making his way across Salem's Greens, now back in full block production since the pox had passed. He was to receive the latest estimates of block production to make sure there'd be enough for their latest project. Peyto sent up another prayer of gratitude that they had something to do, since there were no crops to harvest. Through the bustle of people and horses and wagons of ash, Peyto spied his nephew and the supervisor waiting for him. But just as he waved to them, someone tapped him on the shoulder. "Rector Shin, the tower message went up for you, but I don't think you heard the chimes over the noise here." Peyto looked to the tower and exhaled. "Emergency? Second resting station, Rector Shin, again." Peyto added that last part. This would be the 5th time in 4 weeks, and he knew what he'd find. Anoki Kaya, likely violent, again. He was, however, a little surprised the message was for him, because after the last incident, Shem told Peyto he'd handle the next one himself. Shem felt that the former soldier and law enforcer probably needed a more forceful hand, and Shem didn't want any witnesses. He was only half joking when he said that. Then again, there were probably more pressing matters than the troubled marriage of the Kayas to call Shem away. Peyto would do what he could and prayed he might be inspired with something more. He turned to shrug an apology to Cephas and the supervisor, but they were already approaching. His nephew asked discreetly, "The Kayas again?" Peyto only grumbled. "I can hold down the fort, so to speak," Cephas assured him. "And I'll give him all the numbers," the supervisor promised. "So far, we seem to be on target with our projections." "Well, that's all I really wanted to know," Peyto said, shoving his notes into Cephas's hands. "Just update the lists, please. I'm needed elsewhere," he sighed. "Be sure to duck quicker this time, Uncle Peyto," Cephas said. "Thanks for the reminder," he mumbled as he rubbed his jaw. And it was just starting to feel better, too. Shem rode his fastest up the narrow canyon trail. Years ago, he would have made quicker progress, but large sections of the trail were still covered in ash and fallen trees, and normally sure-footed Silver was skittish. Shem wasn't even sure if they came this way, but the ash before him looked recently disturbed. Foolish! Foolish, dangerous, and stupid! What were they thinking? Where'd they think they were going? Shem sighed in frustration as he again slid off his horse to lead her through another tangle of fallen trees. At least if he was slowed by the debris, they might be too. But still they'd had several hours' lead. Shem climbed back on his horse and coaxed her into an uneasy trot up the ashy trail. He scanned below to see if any horses or bodies had slipped down the steep slope to the river. How could they succeed on this terrain? Shem was one of the best horsemen around, and even he was struggling. He hoped they had stopped at the temporarily abandoned Glacial Valley Fort. He could surprise them, and then he needed some inspiration as to what to do then. The image that kept coming to him was beating Anoki into a bloody blob. Shem shook his head to try to lose that thought. After all these years, his aggressive nature still plagued him. Perrin had said frequently that Shem had lost his fighting spirit after coming to Salem, but that wasn't true. He just suppressed his urges again and again. He had plenty of practice at restraining his impulses for other inappropriate behavior while he still lived in the world. When he came home, he just shifted his focus. More often than he cared to admit, he wanted nothing more than to act on the aggression he learned to hone in the Army. But a man prone to violence was not what the Creator needed as guide. Yet sometimes he wondered if at times like this, the Creator didn't expect the former sergeant major to reach back into his training in order to level a man in less than 2 seconds. As for Priscilla, Shem shook his head in dismay. She was barely 16, and maybe didn't really know what she was agreeing to. Anoki was older by 10 years, much larger and stronger, and maybe he pressured her into joining him. But Shem knew he was being overly optimistic about her. Each time he saw the Thorns or received a report from Pato, Priscilla was significantly less than satisfied with Salem. Her mind was still in midplane, and all the diversions it afforded. She was just starting to get the attentions of the young men there, had found ways to sneak away to watch the fights at the arenas, and thought the world was hers for the taking before she was taken from it. Even after the quarantines had been lifted, Priscilla wasn't interested in getting to know any of the neighboring girls or helping them with any of the cleanup projects, nor did she look at any of the young men who looked at her. Delia had made several fast friends, but no one was quite up to Priscilla's expectations, much to Druce's grief. As if Druce's Thorn didn't have a hard enough life, now she had an utterly selfish daughter to add to her misery. It just wasn't fair. Somehow, sometime, the Creator would make it up to Druce's Thorn. Shem already knew he would, but as his horse struggled against the drifting ash, he prayed the suggestion up one more time. When Pato arrived at the second resting station, it was to find an incensed Versa hoeing the withered vegetable garden with ferocity that told Pato he best stay out of swinging range. "Versa," he called cautiously, from 20 paces away and behind a wooden-railed fence. "Something happen?" "Oh, nothing, Rektorchen, nothing at all." A large clump of dirt flew off her hoe and landed somewhere behind Pato. "So," he said, "you're just in the mood to loosen the dirt?" Her hoe came down hard on a rock, and Pato was amazed it didn't crumble into gravel. She threw down the hoe, picked up the large rock, and heaved it toward the fence down from Pato. It cleared with impressive distance. Pato took a few more steps backward. "You'd think," she said breathlessly, as she picked up the hoe again, "that after all these years of being used as a garden, there would be no rocks left." "Never quite understood that myself," Pato responded. "The ground seems to have a way of pushing new ones up every year." "Well, why would it do that?" she shouted at him. Pato took another step back and held up his hands. "I really don't know, Versa. Seems to be one of the ground's mysteries." He looked over to the back porch and saw Drusus and Delia standing by the back door, their eyes red and puffy. Pato nodded to Drusus and hoped she'd save him a safe spot on the covered porch. He turned back to the garden. "Versa, I'm glad to see you're doing something useful." He ducked instinctively as another rock was hurled in his direction. "But you're going to be quite sore if you keep up this pace. In your state, I don't really want to see you get hurt." She spun around to him. "Oh, really? Well, then you'd be the first man who ever worried about me getting hurt." That took all the fight out of her, and she dropped the hoe. Pato ducked under the crossbeams of the fence and strode over to her. Gingerly, he touched her on the arm. "Versa?" "He's gone," Versa whispered bitterly. "And he took Priscilla." Devastated for her, he did the bravest thing he could. He put his arms around her. "Oh, Versa, Versa, I'm so sorry." She stood stiff and angry as Peto moved in closer to hold her. You deserve so much better than this. I used to think that, she said, trying to remain in control of her emotions. But now I've decided I want no one. Nothing personal, Rector Shin, but men are nothing more than selfish animals! She shouted those last words. Ursula! Her mother admonished loudly from the back porch. Peto waved it off. No offense taken, Versa. With your past, I fully understand. But can I suggest something? He said, pulling back to look at her, but still holding her arms. Consider that men are dogs. That's the truth, Versa exclaimed. Peto chuckled. Well, good. So we're in agreement. But what I mean is, some dogs are sweet and gentle, others are barkers, others are good protectors, while others do nothing but eat whatever falls on the floor. It all depends on the kind of breed you get, Versa. The world breeds only the worst kinds of mutts. But in Salem, we have many other kinds. Consider that you have yet to see all that's available. Don't dismiss all men just yet. A couple of us aren't that bad. Versa's eyes softened a notch. You're probably right. You and Guide Zenas are unlike any dogs I've ever met. But right now, I'm not in the mood for any pets. Understood, Versa. And you don't have to be for a long time either. Let's go inside and talk. He put his arm around her to steer her toward the station. Versa sighed. We do need to talk, Rector Shin. I think we may have a bigger problem than you realize. Oh, he said as they approached the back porch. Anoki didn't head for the dissenter colony like he was talking about the last time. He left a note. He went south, back to the world. Peto stopped. No, he can't. We need to tell Shem. He already knows, Rector, Drusa said from the top of the stairs. He left over an hour ago to track them down. Alone? Drusa nodded and wrung her hands in worry. There wasn't time to get him any help, but he said he could handle it. Peto spun and looked to the canyon, as if he could see anything. You're 63, Shem, he whispered. You're not as young as you used to be. He turned back to the women. Delia, run to the tower and have them send a message to Cephas, my assistant. 4 men are needed here urgently on horseback and with emergency packs. Then also tell the tower men to send a messenger to Woodson. It's time to reopen the glacial fort. Delia ran down the steps to the tower as Peto and Versa went into the station and the vast eating room. An agitated Versa plopped on a chair, and Peto sat down next to her, wringing his hands in worry. Drusa sat across the table from them. Versa, Peto began, his mind reeling but still trying to comfort the livid young woman next to him. At times like this, it's... Rector, Versa interrupted him. There's something more you should know. Mother, go get the book, please. Drusus hurried to the gathering room. What is it? Peto asked. Versa sighed. I don't have any proof, just a suspicion. That's why Guide Zenas pursued them without waiting for any help. Her mother returned with a copy of Kalla's book and set it in front of Versa. She opened it to a marked page. Here, this. Peto took the book. The first strongest soldier race. Versa pointed to a spot further down the page. Right here. Wallachia? He was a Garter spy sent to keep an eye on Shem and my father. He stayed at the fort for less than 2 weeks. I was only a toddler at the time. I don't see the significance, though. He came to Salem, right? After Guide Zenas had him kidnapped? Versa reminded him. Yes, but he disappeared before my family and I arrived here. Oh, wait. A thought came to him, and he thumbed to a later chapter. I know what you're looking for, Versa said. I have it marked. He changed his name once he came to Salem. He dropped the first 2 letters and was known instead as Lickaya. Peto's face fell. Lickaya. Oh, no. It gets worse, Rector, Versa warned him. Anoki told me once he had a brother, a captain in the army who called himself Lick. The brothers were ashamed of their father. Apparently, he was an older man and a little bit crazed, always talking about secret places and spies influencing the politics of the world, and that if he was ever discovered by the Garters, he was supposed to kill himself. Anoki told me his father was sure people all around him were being abducted. When the sons became old enough to leave home, each took only a part of the name, Lick and Kaya. Pato held his face, nauseated with worry. Is he still alive? Versa shook her head. He died a few years ago. His wife died when their sons were small. So he made it back, Pato breathed. We were still in Edge when he vanished from Salem. He'd been here for years. Guide Gleese was working with him, and he told us that Lakaya seemed happy. Then suddenly he stopped meeting with Gleese and was gone. They assumed he died trying to get back to the world, but he made it. Versa sighed worriedly. Not only did he make it back to the world, but we may have brought one of his sons to Salem. I suppose coming here and learning what Salemites have done over the years, well, all of that crazy talk of his father now seems a lot less crazy. Did Anoki tell you this? Pato asked. Mention anything at all about his father since he came here? Did he read this book? Versa shook her head. Anoki reads nothing, and the last time he told me about his father, we were still in Midplane. I didn't put all of it together until Delia came across Wallakaya's name last night in her reading. But Anoki's been so agitated, Rector. You've seen him. You've even felt him. By the way, the bruise on your jaw has mostly faded. Pato unconsciously rubbed it. That may explain his agitation. Shem and I could never get a reason from him as to why he was so angry and abusive. But if he suspects the man who had his father kidnapped, which led to his instability later, was also the man trying to fix his marriage, he gripped his head. Oh, what a mess. I'm so sorry, Drusus whispered. If only I'd come when Guide Zenas tried to bring me years ago, we would have avoided all of this. Pato reached across the table and took her hand. Don't you dare try to take any blame for this. The only one responsible for Anoki's behavior is Anoki. You did nothing but try to take care of your family the best you knew how. Drusus sighed, unconvinced. Delia bounded into the room. Messages are sent, Rector. She glanced down at the book. I see you told him. Pato narrowed his eyes as another thought came to him. Versa, he said to her, exactly when did you meet Anoki? Versa scrunched up her mouth as she pondered. A little while after we moved to Midplane, about the same time your scouts found us that second time. Think carefully, Versa. Before or after we found you? Versa began to squint. After. Right after. Anoki was in law enforcement in Midplane. Their fort still employed enforcement officers. He was the one who came to our door late at night after the scouts left. There'd been a report of someone lurking around the house. She covered her mouth in understanding and turned to her mother. Drusus paled. The next day there were soldiers, too. One was a captain, and he asked us a lot of questions. I told them what I told everyone, that I had 2 daughters, that Priscilla was a niece, and we just moved there from Coast. Do you remember that captain's name? Pato asked. Drusus shook her head. No. What are you suspecting, Rector? Could it be that the captain figured out who you were? Even though Lemuel was no longer actively searching for you, do you think that maybe the captain realized you were the general's family and were still in hiding? Drusus turned worriedly to her daughters, and Delia shrugged. Why? Drusus asked in dread. Pato breathed out. If someone suspected there was a secret society, that influenced the politics and kidnapped people in danger, who in the world would that society try to take away? Versa moaned loudly. Ugh, Lemuel Thorne's family. Someone from that society would try to rescue them. I really hope I'm wrong, Peto said, but the more I think about it, the more I feel I'm not. Versa, if Enoki was Walakia's son, and if he and his brother were trying to vindicate their father somehow, wouldn't it be a good idea to connect to the family most likely to be taken to Salem to find out if it existed? Versa's upper lip curled in a sneer. He never wanted me to meet his brother. If it was his brother who questioned us, I would have remembered his sniveling little face. Enoki probably sent him to question us to find out if we were the Thornes. He started courting me barely a week later, and after a season I told him who we really were. No! She roared, shoved away her chair, and bolted for the door. Peto caught up to her before she reached the handle. He wrapped his arms around her from behind as she flailed at the door. What are you planning to do, Versa? He used me, she shrieked as she fought against Peto's grip. He said he loved me, but it was just to find Salem. I'll kill him. That's what I thought, Peto said calmly, struggling to keep her in his arms. Drusus only sat miserably and watched their wrestling match. Peto was alarmed at her lack of response until he realized Drusus was likely used to Versa's moments of rage. As her rector fought to keep her daughter from clawing at the door, Drusus said sadly, Enoki came to me once and said if anyone ever came to take us away that we should go with them to be safe. He was waiting for that. Versa thrashed to free herself from Peto. He told us to follow your scouts. He was so eager to leave that as soon as we got on the trail, She tried vainly to break from Peto's locked arms grip, but he was experienced in restraining much larger and stronger men. A map! Versa screeched. Rector, he wanted your son Ralph to draw a map on the ground for him. Peto held her fast. Versa, calm down. There's no way you can catch him, but Guide Zenas is chasing him right now. Versa writhed again, almost freeing herself from Peto's clutches. If he hurts the guide, I'll rip him apart. Right now, I believe you could. Drusus and Delia shrank at Versa's fury. Now, Versa, Peto said in his best soothing voice as he labored to hold on to her. No one's more protected than the guide. He can handle this. You need to believe that we can, take care of this. Versa lunged one more time, but her strength was failing. Peto was relieved. He was taxed as well. She eventually went limp in his arms. Peto released her just enough to turn her around and catch her in a hug. This time she let him hold her as she began to quake in a tremendous effort to not release any tears. Why did he leave, Rector? If he was so eager to get here, why was he so eager to go? I'm not sure, Peto said. Unless what? Just say it, Rector. Peto sighed as he smoothed her wild blonde locks in a fatherly manner. Unless he only wanted to know the way here. Once he had that, there was no more reason to stay. I'm so sorry, he said as he felt her body shudder. So why take my sister? She whimpered. Peto looked at Drusus and Delia for ideas, but Drusus had new tears trickling down her cheeks, and Delia only stared blankly at the table. I guess we're all wondering that, Versa. Shem sucked in his breath as the glacial valley opened in front of him. It was covered in ash, looking like the snowing season had dropped 2 feet of gray snow instead of white. A distinct furrow was cut straight for the hidden fort, but from that distance he couldn't tell if the tracks extended beyond it. He kicked Silver into a run and reached the fort in near record time. He bounded into the fort and found it silent. He ran down to the supply room. Someone had been there. The carefully folded blankets and stacked packs of dry food were in disarray, as if someone had rushed in there, grabbed as many supplies as they could, and ran back out. Shem snatched an emergency pack and headed to his horse. "Sorry, girl," he whispered as he mounted again. "No rest just yet. See those tracks ahead of us? Salem's about to be exposed." He rode as quickly as he dared, turning over in his mind events from 40 years ago. Had he made a mistake in bringing Captain Wallachia to the forest? No, the impression had come to him very clearly then. Wallachia couldn't stay in Edge. He had been trained by the Garters to capture and kill Perrin's children and mother-in-law. It took Salem several moons of talking and working with Wallachia to turn him right. But he was a changed man, no doubt. Shem had even visited with him a couple of years later, and they laughed about the past. Then a few years after that, Wallachia was gone. Shem was sure he hadn't made a mistake all those years ago, so why did he feel so terrible about it now? Peto was waiting outside of the second resting station as Cephas and the 4 requested scouts came riding up fast. "Thank you for your willingness and speed," he called as they reined their horses to a stop. "We have a real problem. Anoki Kaya and Priscilla Thorne have decided to return to the world." The 5 men groaned. "My reaction exactly," Peto said. "They left approximately 4 hours ago." "4 hours?" Cephas exclaimed. "Uncle Peto—" "I know, but the trail's in bad condition, so there's still hope, especially since 2 hours ago, Guide Zenas headed out after them." Cephas paled. That didn't sound like good news at all. One of the scouts winced. "But Rector Shin, Guide Zenas always said that he was never to return to the world. The danger would be—" "Yes, there's a bit of concern there, as you can see," Peto cut him off. "You 4 need to help Guide Zenas. Catch up to him, help him find Anoki and Priscilla, do whatever else you can. I don't even know what you'll find up there. Woodson's gathering another 12 scouts right now to send up as backup." The men somberly nodded. Peto sighed before saying, "Please, just find Shem. He still thinks he's only 23 years old." The men smiled sadly and kicked their horses in a run. Peto turned to Cephas. Before he could speak, Cephas said, 12 more men? I'll see if Woodson needs any help supplying them. We've notified the regular Glacial Fort staff, and they're getting ready to head back up now, since the volcano seems quiet again. The fort should be back in operation before dinner." Peto smiled at his nephew, whose steadiness he coveted for himself. "Well done, Cephas. Please tell no one else about Uncle Shem chasing after 2 runaways. We don't need to alarm everyone. Oh, and Cephas, tell Aunt Lila and Aunt Calla that you and Shem don't know when you'll be home tonight, right?" Peto squeezed Cephas's arm. "Thank you," he whispered. Cephas nodded and turned his horse back to Salem. Shem reached the end of the glacial valley and evaluated the footing and the narrow path going down the canyon. It was worse than the ride up. How'd they make it down there? His horse's ears twitched in wonderment, too. "Guess we're gonna follow the disturbance in the ash," he muttered, "and look for anything that might have slipped and fallen." Silver stepped nervously at that, but slowly began down the obscured path. "Wish I had a long knife," Shem murmured. Versa was stewing on one of the long sofas in the gathering room when Peto came back into the station. Drusus was waiting for him. "Are they going up the mountain?" she asked. "Yes, the mountain will be crawling with Salemites again soon. As it should be. We'll find them, I'm sure." Drusus' face was drawn and pale. "I'm so sorry about all of this trouble. After all you've done for us." Peto pulled her into a hug, and she stiffened at his touch, even though it was nothing but fraternal. He had discovered early on that the Thorne women were not comfortable with physical contact, especially from males. But Lila had told Peter repeatedly that just because someone wasn't comfortable with hugging, it didn't mean they didn't want the comfort. She had taught him the art of the benign brotherly embrace. "Not at all, Drusus, not at all," he told Drusus as she softened. "The Creator's work is to find those who are lost, confused, or alone. There's nothing greater that we can do than to bring people home." "What will they do to Priscilla?" she asked nervously. "They'll treat her very well, Drusus, except for Shem. He'll give her a mighty lecture before he hugs her and hauls her back." Drusus snorted softly as she stepped out of his embrace, but she kept a hand on his arm. Progress. "Sometimes I wonder what Priscilla would have been like with a father like you, or a grandfather like Guide Zenas. I did all that I could, but raising children alone," she sighed in frustration. "But raising children is so difficult," Peto continued her thought, "that even two parents are overwhelmed. Many of us are lucky to have grandparents to help." His voice quieted. "But even that's no guarantee. Once I lost my father, I knew I'd lose my son, young pair, as well. Even with two parents, two sets of aunts and uncles, and a grandmother, we couldn't keep them here." "I really do understand how you feel," he assured her. "While our family produced a responsible Ralph, we also produced an irrational young Perrin. That must say something about who they are as individuals. You were given a powerful Versa and a flighty Priscilla. Parts of them were decided long ago, before they were born. Those parts are out of our control." Drusus began to cry softly and allowed Peto to hug her again. "I believe you're right, but I still feel like such a failure. How do you get your heart to believe what your mind already knows?" Peto patted her back. "As soon as I figure it out, I'll let you know." Shem went around every bend, past every blind point, and through every low-hanging tree, expecting to see the two horses and riders ahead of him, but there was no one. Every mile he became more restless. He hadn't been this close to the world since he left it 26 years ago. So many memories came back as he rode closer to the overlook. It was like hearing a melody from long ago, and it was a melody he hated. The canyon was eerie. There wasn't an animal or bird anywhere, but still familiar enough. He decided he would stop at the overlook and go no further. If he didn't see Anoki and Priscilla, that meant they had gone to the boulders, and it'd be hopeless after that. He reached the overlook, but saw no one. Discouraged, he gazed at Edge as he'd done so many times in the past. It was still there. He was overcome with an odd mixture of nostalgia and loathing as he viewed the mostly gray village. To the right was the fort, and his eyes bulged at its size. 5 times larger than when he left. The Briders' old farm was completely engulfed, and the new front gate sat at the edge of the village. Shem let out a low whistle as he considered how many soldiers could be housed there. He'd heard how large the fort had grown, but it didn't seem real until he saw it sprawled out sloppily across the northern edge of Edge. His eyes traveled up to the tree line and his favorite fresh spring, but he startled when he noticed the condition of the forest. It was bare. Half of the trees had fallen, and the rest of the standing trees were stripped of all vegetation. Shem gasped in surprise. "You understand now, don't you? You had to see it for yourself." "It's dead," he whispered. "Yes, it is." "All of it. I mean, not just the trees. I don't see any steam rising or any geysers or—" "That's right. The eruption changed everything. All the pressure that fed the mud volcanoes, the hot springs, the poisonous gases, all of it was channeled to awaken deceit. There's nothing left. Look in the distance and you can see deceit, or what's left of it." Shem sagged in disbelief. "That enormous hill flowing south, that's—" Only after a long time of staring in astonishment was he able to focus again on the forest and the boulder field below him. What about the trails through the boulder field? The first resting station collapsed in the land tremor, as did 4 of the paths. There's only one way through now. Does anyone down there know that? Only one person, 3 weeks ago, discovered just how dead the forest is. But that will change soon. Patrols began again 2 weeks ago, and eventually they'll be brave enough to enter the forest. Was that one person young Pear? Yes, he made it all the way through the forest on his birthday. Was he trying to come home? Not really. His heart wasn't in it, but Perrin got him as far as the boulder field. Young Pear was right in front of the entrance to the remaining footpath, but Perrin didn't reveal it. I can almost feel him, Shem said wistfully. Seeing the command tower, it's almost as if Perrin's there again. That's because he is. Can't he break away, only for a moment? No. He promised Mari he'd always stay by his side. You really don't need him, though. Shem sighed. I know. It'd just be good to feel him again. He knows you're here, and he wants your opinion about the fort. Shem grinned. It's an abomination. Look at that thing. Lemuel has no sense of style or organization. He'll be glad to hear of your disapproval. He was relieved to see some of the letters for Fort Shin had fallen off the inner wall. He didn't want his name attached to it anymore. What letters are remaining? Just the T, H, I, and N. Shen smiled. So it's thin? Rather weak and appropriate, he chuckled. As he surveyed the sprawling compound, a thought formed. I know what you're thinking, and you can't do it. Why not? You know why not. I used to do it. Sneak in, take things, sneak out. No one ever saw me. I could do it again. I could go right in there and take him out. Now, tell me the reasons why you can't. Shem blinked back tears. Because it's not the Creator's will. Because young Pear has to make that choice for himself. And because they'd hear your knees cracking as you'd sneak in during the night, according to Perrin. Shem snorted. True, true. Oh, but I'm so close, he whispered. That's not why you were allowed to come this far. It was to see the forest, wasn't it? Yes, you realize what this means. Shem exhaled. Salem's no longer protected by nature. Anyone can stroll up through the trees and find their way to the boulder field. But at least that's still a barrier. And how much of a barrier will it be to desperate people? Shem frowned. We tried that once, climbing over the boulders. It was difficult, but it took only a few hours to traverse. And with the threat of the terrifying forest gone, traversing the boulders will no longer seem so daunting. But no horses can make it through, can they? No, they can't. That will give you time. You mean time once they begin to come? Yes. When? How long? When they feel the need, when they become desperate. How long would it take for you to become desperate if you lived in the world? Shem rubbed his face anxiously. 1 day, but then that's because I'm a Salemite, and I know there's a better way. We need to get ready, don't we? We're prepared already, but when are they coming? Just remain prepared, Shem. Then it won't matter when they come, be it next season or in 10 years. Just always be ready, and there'll be no need to fear. Head back now, before it gets dark. There's nothing more I can do here? No one I can see? No, I'm sorry. Go home. What about Tanoki and Priscilla? They brought their own troubles upon themselves. There's no help for them now. Go home, Shem. Shem turned his horse and started back up the trail. Peto didn't know what else to do but sit next to a glowering Versa. He positioned himself judiciously on the sofa, close enough to help, but far enough away out of swinging distance. She hadn't touched her midday meal, and now Peto held a full plate of dinner. Delia didn't dare come into the gathering room anymore, and a tearful Drusus had gone to lie down in her room. Two neighbor women who had come to help comfort Drusus were now cleaning up in the kitchen. They peered through the doorway to see what else they could do, but seemed to hope that Peto didn't need assistance. Versa continued to stare at the wall, and Peto was sure that at any moment the wood planking would splinter in shame. It's all right to weep, Versa. It will make you feel better. Never let them see your tears, she muttered severely. What was that? Her glare met his eyes. Never let them see your tears. It's what I learned, Rector. But since you were never a girl in the world, it's a little wonder you don't know that. You've heard about the rape gangs? Yes, unfortunately I have. Soldiers, Versa said with measured fury. They always had their pick of sows, but occasionally they'd go out as a group looking for something new. Usually it was after they took over a village or there had been unrest in an area. They'd wait for the girls leaving a shop or coming home from school. The ones who cried and trembled when they saw them, that's who they went for. The weak ones. I'm guessing you never appeared weak, Peto ventured. She nodded, gazing again at the wall. I'd stare them down. They wanted tears and I refused to give them any. I think they felt powerless and bullied by their commanders and the general, so they went out and bullied someone else. They'd take the girls who whimpered and pleaded, but I'd stand my ground, pull out my knife, and never shed a tear. A few still tried. She glanced at Peto, who was subtly leaning back to a safer distance. But I was too practiced with my knife. She smiled partway, a dark, terrifying smile. I remember what you told me about that, Peto said, with the men who try to take advantage of you, and I will never forget. He fought the urge to protectively cross his legs. She nodded smugly, but he noticed the growing despair behind her confident facade. Again she turned to the wall. Don't give anyone your tears or give him control over you. That's just the way I see it, Rector. No one wants to control you. We just want you to feel better. She scoffed at that, but Peto tried one more time. Have I told you lately how sorry I am for the existence you had in the world? A corner of her mouth went upward. After the 5th time, I told you to quit it, but I appreciate hearing it today. They sat in silence until Peto picked up her plate. You need to eat something, Versa, he said gently. I'm not going to promise this will make you feel better, but at least your stomach will stop rumbling. Why? Versa said shortly. Peto blinked. Because when your stomach has food in it... Versa rolled her eyes. I mean, why should I bother eating? Why do you care? I still don't understand that. She turned to face him properly. All we've done is bring aggravation to Salem. You and the guide should have left us, thorns down there, Rector Shin. We would have been better off covered in ash. Everyone would be. Peto set the plate down and experimentally put his hand on her shoulder. Even that felt cold and rigid. But when she didn't shrug him off, he said, I don't believe that, and neither do you. You're not like him, Versa. You're not like your father. I know you worry about that. Peto could see she wasn't accepting that. Remember how we strained the water for the first 2 weeks after Deceit erupted to make sure all the particles were removed before we drank it? Versa sighed before answering a slow, yes. It had been a tedious and messy task that everyone was glad to be done with. And the water that ran from the cloth filters was clean and palatable. Versa, you are like that filter. All the filth that the thorns possessed, you've cleaned from the water. Their influences can go no further than you. Your mother says you're like the general, but you're nothing like him. You're strong and solid in ways he never will be, but he wishes he were. The destruction of the thorn line ends with you and your sister Delia. Your mother ended the muck of the snide line herself. Your descendants will look to you as the best beginning, as the women who changed their futures. Versa scoffed. Rector Shin, you Salemites are far too optimistic. I grew up in the world, Versa, he reminded her. I still possess a great deal of its cynicism. But not about you. You belong in Salem. I can't see it, she whispered, and Peto heard her desperate wish that she could. Then it's a good thing that the Creator can, Peto told her. He was the one who impressed the guide that it was time to try again to retrieve your family. Maybe Guide Zenas misunderstood the Creator. Peto shook his head. I've known Shem my entire life. He never misses anything. You were meant to be here, and whatever sacrifice it takes to keep you safe is worth it. Even my father wanted to bring your family here for many years, and every time we tried, it was because he had asked to send out the scouts. He'd be thrilled to know you finally made it. I've never regretted you coming, nor has Shem. It seems our families are meant to intertwine this way. I often find myself thinking of you and your sisters as my nieces, because Versa, we are all family. Versa's gaze fixed again upon the wall, her eyes red and puffy, but still with no tears. I fear Anoki's going to ruin everything, Rector Shin, she whispered. Peto sat back and stared at the wall as well. The world's a lot tougher than we realize. I joked with my father and brother-in-law a long time ago that if my middle son were let loose on the world, he'd destroy it. It's been a year now, and I'm fairly confident young Pear did not cause Mount Deceit to erupt, although some of his cousins believe he must have had something to do with it. He smiled feebly and looked askance at Versa. Her face didn't move. Peto sighed. We just need to trust the Creator will take care of everything somehow. It's all part of His plan. And what if the Creator doesn't want to this time? Versa asked. What if we've disappointed Him too often? Peto exhaled. He'd asked himself that very question before. Versa, there's a lot you don't know about fathers since you never had a good one. But the very best will love you no matter how often you disappoint them. And they'll do everything they can to help you fix the problems as long as you're doing your part. The Creator is the Father of us all, and the very best there's ever been. Have some faith that He can still make miracles for you. Versa scoffed. Ugh, place of miracles. That's what Guide Zenas said. If the Creator can fix this and prove to me that men aren't dogs, present company excluded, then I really will believe in miracles. And that's the end of that chapter. Thank you.